get started with my part so we can get to the main event quicker. And I am going to mute everyone. You should automatically mute when you come in, but I'm going to mute everybody. So welcome. Thank you all for coming. If you've been to a shelter series before, you notice that the format is a little bit different this time. We've previously been doing webinars where we can't see anybody, but we thought we would try this time to do a meeting format so that we could see you all and kind of connect, you know, a little bit before and during the event. So of course you're welcome to keep your video on or turn it off, but we are going to have everyone muted during the presentation, except of course for Myrick. So again, you know, welcome to our shelter series event at this afternoon. So this time when sheltering, I forgot I'm Clarissa, I work at PNC. So during this time when sheltering has become a central part of our lives, we wanted to create a space and connect with you to explore the culture, architecture, diversities, and stories of the many buildings and houses that serve as shelters across our state. So this is one of several shelter series events that we've done and that we'll have scheduled throughout the year. So please check at preservationnc.org for more shelter series events. This afternoon, we're excited to present stories and discoveries at the Hall and Grays Fields houses, which are Preservation North Carolina's headquarters office. And our presenter today is Preservation NC President Myrick Howard. And so just before I turn it over to Myrick, just wanted to go over quickly, again, we are in a meeting format which allows for more connection, but a little less control for our hosts. So I'm going to have everyone muted during the presentation, but we absolutely want you all to ask questions. And so how I'll manage that is once Myrick is finished, you can unmute yourselves and you can either ask your question live, just like you were in an in-person meeting, if anybody remembers what that is like. And then, or you can ask a question in the chat and I can read it out loud and ask that way. So those are the two ways. There won't be an after party like we were doing before because we're all here now, but we love to have you stay after Myrick is finished for additional questions or just connecting with folks. So that's how we're going to roll today. And also we'll be sending out a survey. It won't pop up at the end of this like it usually does, but we'll send it via email. So if you all can take a few minutes to take that survey, let us know what you think of, you know, this format, the topic, anything. We're really interested in your feedback as we continue the series. And yeah, I think that's it. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Myrick.
Cool. Okay. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. This is sort of a variation of a program I've given to another group, and people seem to like it. And so I was like, well, let's use it for a few more folks. It's always interesting doing these kinds of presentations online. I teach over at Chapel Hill in the spring, and you know, after spring break, we came back into a virtual classroom, and the first presentation I thought was so bad. I just thought it was so bad. I mean, no interaction, and my TA reminded me that everybody was in shell shock. It was the Monday after they came back for the first time, and they were all over the country, and you know, somewhere where they didn't want to be, and didn't know exactly how this was all going to play out. Second class ended up being much easier. So this hopefully will work well, trying this on a little different format. Well, let's try that again, see if this thing, well, it's not going to make it easy for me. Let's, okay. I don't know why the first time it didn't work. I'm going to do a few things that just kind of set the stage and then kind of get into some of the things that we found in the process of doing the two houses on Oberlin Road in Raleigh. First, Preservation North Carolina, founded in 1939, and our main event is the property work we do. We also operate the Bellamy Museum down in Wilmington, which we got as part of the animal shelter. And we generally say we take care of the poor dogs and cats that nobody else wants to take care of. But like the animal shelter, we're generally putting these properties into other people's hands to renovate them and love them and take care of them. But the analogy to animal shelter works really well for us. Back a few years ago, we were downtown in the Briggs building. Back in the late 90s, we purchased the Briggs building with the A.J. Fletcher Foundation, and they helped us a good deal with the financing of that purchase, renovated it. At that point, we still had a downtown mall, and for those with long memories, so to speak, that mall was pretty grim, and we had a concrete fountain right in front of the Briggs building, and sure, say on a windy day you did not want to be walking by that fountain, and there were lots of windy days because you weren't real sure what was in that fountain. Actually, you sort of knew what was in that fountain, and that's why you really didn't want to go there. But we were looking back for a new headquarters to move to. We had moved several times through the years, had a number of ideas, and then an opportunity came up in Oberlin Village, and we thought, well, let's give this a try and see if we can put it together, because we had tried several things and nothing seemed to work quite right. And usually that's a sign of, it's not quite the right thing. But Oberlin's fascinating. I'll talk more about Oberlin. It was a freedmen's community built after the Civil War by freed slaves, and it was a freestanding community. Unfortunately, they did not incorporate. Someday somebody will do the research to figure out, was the lack of incorporation because of the white power structure not letting them do it, or was it because they didn't want to do it and didn't want to deal with the taxes involved, etc. But it got quite large. There are references to Oberlin having 1,200, 1,400 people for an unincorporated community that's quite large. But there were two houses that were in trouble. One was the Plummer Hall house, small house, only 600 square feet. And I put that in there because people are shocked to look at this house and think how very, very small it is. It looks like a good sized house, and that was an important part of the message. It looks very substantial from the street. But the interesting little twist is the ceiling height as you walk up onto the porch is just slightly over 6 feet. If you're 6.5 feet, you are hitting your head against the porch structure. So the rooms are small, the ceilings are low, giving it a sense of being a larger house. House had some trouble, I'll show you that. And then the other house was in immediate trouble. We had basically a 12-month demolition delay on this house to get it off the site. Fortunately, the owner was willing to give us more time because we were not remotely ready from a permit standpoint to move the house at the end of 12 months, although we thought we should be. This house is only 1,400 square feet. Again, from the street view, it looks very substantial, and quite large, but it's not very deep at all. It's only the two-story part of the house is only one room deep, and the rooms are modest in size. I'll show you more of that later. You got some cool trim, which you didn't see from the street because of the awnings. And I always loved this. The original builder of the house named the house, and I like to think the idea is that if white folks could name their houses, by God, black folks could name their houses too. So we've worked with any number of oak, plantations with the word oak in it in Warren County with our property work, and we now have our office in Oak Crest. Sweet house, interesting detailing, more on that in a moment. This is photographs from almost 20 years ago when we were trying to take a look at the house then on site. So we had to move both houses. The whole house, the little one-story house, sat really up on the city's right-of-way, right up at the sidewalk. And you can see the property lines, it's a parallelogram, not a rectangle. So we had to move it up and over at an angle. So it's still at an angle to the property lines, but parallel to the street. The Gray's house, the two-story house, was moved from the other side of Oberlin Baptist Church, which is next door to us. So it was really moved only as the crow flies, a couple hundred feet. We had to move it around the back of the church and put it in place. And in order to make the property work from a code standpoint, we had to connect them. The connection as it ends up is underground between a basement under this house and a basement under that house in order to make it work as a single structure, because we couldn't have two structures on one lot under the zoning. One of the surprises that came along was the colors for the houses. They're not quite this yellow in reality. In fact, the name of one of these colors is got the word blue in it. But it's sort of cool to find out that they were in rich Victorian colors, which tells you how ambitious the builders were. The whole house dates from the late 1870s, and the Gray's house from the mid 1880s, and they were using the up-to-date colors. In fact, let's go how up-to-date. This is the same set of colors that the Executive Mansion trim was, which was also completed in 1885. And if you go to the Executive Mansion, hadn't been painted those colors in 100+ years. But you'll see windows like the windows we have at the Gray's house, but they took the stained glass, the colored glass out, and replaced them all with white glass as the Victorian era became not liked from an architectural standpoint. Yes, the whole house had problems. We had to take off an addition on the back of the whole house that was built in the 1990s. We had to take off an addition that was only 20 years old because the addition had just severe termite damage. This is all termite damage on the new wood. You can see the old wood had much less damage than the new wood. New wood is in the 1990s. And this is part of the porch roof that was rebuilt with new wood. And when you have that kind of termite damage in your roof structure, you got a problem. So that house was very damaged by termites. So we took off the additions in the process and moved it back. I saw Paul Setliff is on, and Paul took this photograph. Thank you, Paul. So it moved, we just slid it back, and literally they slid it on rails to put it in the new position. just moving it back from the road. Here's the Graves house being moved around the back of the Oberlin Baptist Church property. Fascinating to watch a move these days because no trucks involved. These are all dollies that have electric motors on them. They're each independently controlled by basically remote control. So it's like this giant car that's being moved around by remote control, weighing several tons. And there they are now, for those of you who may not have seen it, on Oberlin Road in their original colors. And they really have a lot of presence to the street, which is what the owners intended. I mean, this is all, you know, for a 600 square foot house, that's a lot of bang. And for a 1,400 square foot house, that's a lot of bang. The photographs here are by the Capital City Camera Club, and we're really grateful for a time working with them. We've had a little fun with the, you know, kind of working on the landscape despite COVID. I particularly like, these are winter jasmine. They were on the site, the original site. We dug them up using a bobcat. We set them in the back behind the new, where the house was going to go on its new lot, covered them up with mulch, and they stayed there for nearly 2.5 years before we put them back in place. They're healthy as can be, and this winter they should be blooming vigorously. We every time we could find plants on the old site, we dug them up. Actually put them at my house in the yard with the notion of digging them back up and bringing them over. I guess one of the surprises, if you drive by the house right now, there are a pair of coleuses that we found on the old site. Actually found them, growing behind there was a porta-john, and they were growing out from behind the porta-john. Dug them up, took them, nursed them. One of the coleuses is now taller than me. I've never heard of a coleus 6 feet tall. And by next year, we will have so many seedlings that, you know, anybody who wants coleus, come get them. It's a dark purple, almost black coleus. And as I say, the one that's right there, if you walk by the house, take a look, or drive by, it's taller than me now. And it's got a few more months of growing season. This is I think the 100% room, in the sense of, this is the parlor. This has been very fashionable. These are the same kinds of windows that you found in the executive mansion. As I say, the executive mansion, however, has taken the color glass out and just replaced them with white glass, making them relatively vanilla in the process. One of the things real interesting about this house, and we didn't know, and we continue to figure some things out, is that nothing matches, which leads you to think in the construction process, they were getting materials on an as available basis. Now, Willis Graves, who built the house, was a brick mason, and maybe on some of the jobs he's working on, there'd be an extra window here, extra moldings there, etc. But to use an example, the Victorian beaded board underneath this window does not match the beaded board underneath this window. The moldings beside this window do not match the moldings beside the door, which is directly across the hall room from the windows. The corner blocks up in the corners where right there, the corner blocks of the window doesn't match the corner block of the doors. When you get down to it, this window does not match these. It actually has one additional pane of colored glass compared to this, and different color palette. Then you go outside. This porch post does not match. Well, come back. This porch post on the front of the house do not match these porch posts on the side of the house. Again, the best we could figure is they are building a house with what they can get their hands on to make it work, and it worked for almost 140 years, and we hope that it will work for at least another 100, if not 140 or 400. I don't know. Inside, again, you have each room has different flooring, different wainscot, different moldings. The mantles are interestingly different, as in some are on the back end of the style, sort of old-fashioned when they were put in. Others are brand new, front end of the style, the newest and latest things. So fascinating. And this looks like a pretty impressive stair, but it really is fairly steep pitched and fairly narrow. But again, they were building a house to show off well. And every time we look at it, we realize things like these kind of globe-shaped ornaments on top of the stairs. These two are round, and this is kind of egg-shaped. So it clearly came from different places. The molding, the balusters here at this flat level are of different heights and each one is cut differently, which shows that they were intended for a stair, which is going up at an angle. So, you know, we continue to see stuff like that. There's the oak crest sign, and oh, by the way, the stained glass there matches none of the stained glass in anywhere else in the house. So where it came from, who knows? Whole house has an interesting. It started as a one-story house that went from, there's the edge of the roof there, so a little over that, and it went to about there. It was 2 rooms, center hall. Then the story is that the church built the office that's off on the right-hand side as you're looking in the house, which projects forward, which again makes the house look bigger than it actually is. And at that point, or thereabouts, they came in and added about 6 additional feet of space onto the side of the house to give it a little more balance and to build this polygonal porch decoration. And if you come up and look at it pretty carefully, you'll see on the siding, I mean, there's a place where the seam is very clear where they added on to the porch. Inside, not a whole lot of detail because the remodeling in the 1990s took out what was there, and I'm not sure it had much. I mean, this is the preacher's house versus the brick mason's house, and the brick mason's into politics, which I'll show you, and he's very involved in building a and he's a very ambitious person. The floors in this part of the house, this is where the preacher's office is a step down, and that door is hardly 2 feet wide. But in the 1990s, they put oak floors over the original floors, and the termites tunneled between the 2 floors. And interestingly, did more damage to the oak floor than to the hard pine floor, which tells you hard pine is actually harder than oak, which I was real surprised to see. So let's go into some of the surprises that we found as we were doing the process. Now, I've lived in Cameron Park, as some of you know. This is Cameron Park. Cameron Park's named for the Cameron family, Camerons were the largest slaveholding family in North Carolina, and they owned the land Cameron Park is on. They owned much of the land that Cameron Village is on. This photograph is from the late 1940s as they are developing Cameron Village. This is where the shopping center is, and this is where the residential area of Cameron Village, single family houses are, and then apartment houses going back over here. To orient you, the fire station is actually right there. I think they took down a house right there to build the fire station in the 1950s. Chuck, your house is right along there. In that block right there. So this is coming up. They're building the new road, Clark, to connect with Clark over here. And the banks are along Clark there. Big apartment building here, big apartment building here now, McDonald's, here's Teeter. So that kind of orients you, Oberlin Road going out. And I think that probably is the Graves house right there. But that's about 1947. Within a couple of years, here is what Cameron Village looked like. Now, this is Oberlin Road here. There's Clark coming in to intersect with Oberlin Road right there. Fire station being right over here. Orientation, this is where Harris Teeter is now. At that time, it was Sears. And it's interesting to recognize that Sears and other stores in Cameron Village had white and colored water fountains. They were still being put in the 1940s and 1950s. So I have a vague recollection of them myself. But Sears had right at the front entrance, which was on this side, right at the front entrance, there was the white and the colored water fountains. To orient you one more time, that's where McDonald's was. And this is where the big apartment, one of the big apartments, the Berkshire is. This is where another one of the big apartments is. The post office used to be here. BB&T is there across the street from Harris Teeter. This back that you see back there is Cameron Village, and Wade Avenue does not yet exist. You can see Wade Avenue ends up taking off around that back side of this. This is the parking lot for the Occidental building, and Wade Avenue is along there, and this is the old Rex Hospital, now Employment Security. So happened very fast, very large development, and at this point, the houses of Oberlin that were on Oberlin Road are still there in this block. In this block, they are gone. Of course, they're all gone now. To orient you one more time, this is what you're looking at. Down here's the fire station. This is Clark. This is Oberlin. Those houses that I said were still there are there. The house, all the houses on this side are gone. All of this was Oberlin, all gone. This side was not Oberlin. This side was Cameron land from about there all the way back. And we can come back if somebody has questions about it. We're going to keep going though, but I can circle back if people have questions about that. So some of our surprises. We were happily surprised to find in 1881 there was a North Carolina Supreme Court case where the defendant was Viney Farrar, who was the mother of Willis Graves. And she won, and it was a case that served as major precedent in North Carolina law for a number of years. And you know, here in 1881 is a Black woman standing up for her property rights against an institution, and she wins. Of particular interest is the court case. North Carolina Supreme Court justice that wrote the opinion was Justice Ruffin Jr., whose father's portrait was just removed from the state Supreme Court building not more than 3 or 4 weeks ago. The father wrote a case that's one of the most pro-slavery, anti-human opinions written anywhere in the United States. Where the basic finding was that the owner of a enslaved person could do whatever they wanted to do to the enslaved person. If you killed an enslaved person, it was not murder, because that person, the enslaved person, was not a person. and thus his portrait has been removed. It's interesting that this case was, it was the son who was the author of it. So one of the things I was unfamiliar with, and a lot of these discoveries, I must say, are things I didn't have a clue about. I did not know anything about Emancipation Day. And this is a lead up to that. We found that Willis Graves ran for the General Assembly twice. The second time he ran for the General Assembly was 1898, a particularly awful year to be running for the General Assembly. This newspaper article, November 8th, 1898, is 2 days before the Wilmington massacre. You can see how it is written. Big mob of Negroes at the courthouse last night. There's a reference in here. Vote the black man's ticket, exclaims Willis Graves and other Negro speakers. It is a hideously ugly article. Willis Graves, a very black man with a voice like a foghorn, was the next speaker. You know, if you can imagine a newspaper today saying, you know, someone's with a voice like a foghorn, let's see, began with this salute to the human sea of inky faces before him. Again, it's hard to look at this stuff and not recognize that slavery, the end of slavery was not the end of racism by any stretch of the imagination, and how far we still have to go in that regard. Well, note the date again, November 8th. So Willis Graves did not win, to put it mildly, and in fact by 1900 he couldn't even be running for the legislature. Sorry. This is January 5th, 1899. This is a matter of 8 weeks after after that earlier article. By this time, this is Emancipation Day. And you can see it's the 36th anniversary of Emancipation Day, of the Emancipation Proclamation. It was the big event in Raleigh and many other southern towns for African Americans. It was an event with choirs and parade and speakers and resolutions. And Willis Graves was the president of the Emancipation Day celebration in 1899 for the first time, and he was the president of it for the next 10 years, which would have been a big deal at the time. And don't you know, 8 weeks after he has run for political office, to have that become the statement from Emancipation Day was no doubt a very, very, very painful time for him and for others, realizing that after the Wilmington massacre, things have changed. There are also, it's kind of interesting to look at the Emancipation Day activities from year to year. Again, you'll see W.M. Graves is the president, and he gives a talk, and they make various resolutions. It's interesting, for example, this is a comment that we think of, this is kind of interesting to read in light of Governor Charles B. Aycock and his name that has been taken off of building after building. We hope that the Honorable R.B. Glenn, Governor-elect, who's from Charlotte, will be at least as liberal in this matter as his predecessor, Honorable Charles B. Aycock, and further reduce, et cetera, et cetera. It's interesting how many times Aycock is looked at pretty favorably by the African Americans in Raleigh, and that's because he was promoting universal education was segregated, but it was universal. That is, every child should go to school. I'm not standing up for the racism side of ACOG, but it is kind of interesting to read these words coming out of the Emancipation Day events. So when we got started with this project, the National Register nomination said that Willis Graves was a brick mason, Eleanor Graves was an educator. Their children went north as brick masons or carpenters or plasterers. And the National Register nomination would have been written 20 plus years ago without the benefit, mind you, of the internet. So they're looking at a 1906 city directory and finding, here's Eleanor, who's now got a little grocery store out in the front yard, long since gone. Willis, the father, who's a plasterer, and son Lemuel, who at that point is about 20, 21 years old. Lemuel is being advertised as plasterer. Well, Lemuel has just gotten his degree from Shaw, and he's about to take off for an Ivy League school in 1906. And it's kind of interesting to think, Willis has brought up his kids knowing the skills that he knows. I guess in a sense as a backup in case all of this education doesn't work in light of what's been going on in the world with Jim Crow and segregation and disenfranchisement and so forth. So he's got a backup career for young Lemuel. But if you were doing National Register nomination 20 years ago, you would have looked at this and said, oh, Lemuel Graves, he was a plasterer and he went north. Makes sense? Well, but it actually wasn't quite that way. Lemuel went to Shaw, got a BA, and then went to Cornell to get a BS. And this is his 1910 photograph. That's the year he's graduating with a degree from Cornell. And Lemuel, as it ends up, is the first student to have been inducted into Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, which is the major African-American fraternity. It was founded at Cornell. The founders are referred to as jewels. Lemuel's not a jewel. He's the first student to be inducted as a student. And it is said that Lemuel designed the medal for the fraternity. And it was much celebrated when the fraternity hit its 100th anniversary. And he ended up coming back to Raleigh. He went to Cornell, did graduate work at Columbia, took both Ivy League schools. Here's a young Raleigh man going to New York and doing quite well, taught at a couple of universities and came back to Raleigh and set up his own business. And by 1926, he is president of the Emancipation Association. So there he's taken the cue from his father, who's still alive, as the president of the Emancipation Association. We don't know how long, I don't know, and I haven't seen anything that says how long the Emancipation Association continued, in large part because the News and Observer is not digitized after the mid-1920s. It's sitting in the state archives, but it has not been digitized. This was Lemuel Graves' home, which, for those of you from Raleigh, that's where BB&T sits now, across the street from the Harris Teeter. They apparently had tennis court in the backyard, little orchards in the backyard that backed up to Tower Street. But they decided to leave. Plus or minus in the early 1930s, they walked away from 11 properties. Tax foreclosure, they were all sold at the courthouse door. Lemuel's a good businessman, and Lemuel must think to himself, it's not worth trying to sell these houses. It's just not worth trying to sell them. They walked away, left them in foreclosure. They were basically sold to white speculators. And Lemuel moved to New York, had a penthouse on Morningside Drive, so he is not poor. Had that penthouse for 30 plus years, family did, overlooking Morningside Park, backs up to the backside of the Columbia campus. And this photograph, Lemuel is the one with the bow tie. This is his son, Gene Lim Jr., and his wife, and children and grandchildren. And one of the things that's been a real pleasure is we've been able for the family to get several pieces of poetry written by Lemuel. This was the beginning of something he wanted to write. He did not complete it. I didn't pull out the transcript, but so this is Oberlin, or was Oberlin, for it is gone, merged into a growing metropolis at a loss of its distinctive character, caught in the whirlpool of progress, a Negro town not of necessity or compulsion, but possessor of vitality and charm. You know, sad to read, because it's gone. So Lemuel was listed in Who's Who in Colored America, and this would have been before he moved to New York City. So let's move forward 4 years, and his next younger brother is listed Willis M. Jr., bricklayer, home on Oberlin. Also listed here is Sister Christine, who's a teacher at Oberlin School, and his other sister, Mildred. You'll see photographs of them shortly. So, Willis Jr., who's known as Bill, goes to Howard Law School. Also, interestingly, at the same time, over at Howard School of Medicine is Dr. Ossian Sweet. Both of them moved to Detroit. They knew each other at Howard. They knew each other in Detroit. Dr. Sweet was a physician. He had his own practice. He and his wife did a 6-month trip to Europe and came back, bought a house, and after he bought the house, a mob gathered in front of the house, and someone was killed. A bystander was killed. It's not clear who killed the bystander. It may have been any number of folks, as we know how when you have a lot of folks out, a lot of them have guns. That happens, sadly. Well, there were guns inside the house. So the police arrested Sweet, his brother, and 9 other men who were in the house. Fortunately, they didn't get lynched. There was an effort in Detroit to lynch them. This was in the 1920s. It ended up that the first trial was a mistrial. The second trial, it was an all-white male jury. Clarence Darrow, famous defense attorney, was hired by the NAACP, and Sweet was acquitted. Interestingly, our Bill Graves is working with Clarence Darrow on the case. He's at that point in his 20s, graduate of Howard Law School, and he's working for the brand new NAACP Legal Defense Fund. If you're interested in this trial, this book is absolutely fascinating. It won the National Book Award in the early 2000s. Reads like a novel, and yet it's a history book. And Kevin Boyle is now working on a book on white flight, which should be really interesting. But this book I recommend with 5 stars. If you can do 6 stars, I give it 6 stars. It's really interesting. And just in the last few weeks, it's announced that the Sweet House is going to become a museum. There was a interesting webinar about it just in the last week. Park Service gave Detroit $500,000 for the district. The house is being donated to a nonprofit and is going to get restored in honor of this event. This is considered one of the 10 top trials in the United States of the 20th century. A lot of folks don't know about it because it was 100 years ago, but it's Trayvon Martin in reverse. I mean, this is a case where a white jury acquits a black man for killing a white person, which was really quite amazing. And interestingly, Ossian and his wife Gladys Sweet introduced Bill Graves to his wife Irene at the dinner table. So that's a real interesting connection. Bill Graves went on to litigate a number of cases to the Michigan Supreme Court on housing discrimination and particularly on racially restrictive covenants. The Sweet House did not have racially restrictive covenants, but the neighborhood was an all-white neighborhood, and obviously that case put a passion in Bill Graves' work to work on this subject. This is the couple, the man in the white shirt and the lady in the black dress, was the Michigan case related to racially restricted covenants that was then joined with a Missouri case and a Washington, D.C. case to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. And this photograph must have been the same day as the photograph you just saw inside. I'm guessing the newspaper took both photographs because they're all wearing the same clothes and same cast of characters. But this is Detroit awaits racial ruling. Here are Western Union telegraphs between Thurgood Marshall and Bill Graves, and the case was racially restricted covenants were basically declared unenforceable by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1948, kind of a precursor to what's going to happen 6 years later with Brown versus Board of Education. One of the interesting little twists about this particular case is, if my memory serves me right, 3 of the justices had to recuse themselves because of they lived in houses with racially restricted covenants. And so only 6 justices decided the case. Little twist here is that this article in the Pittsburgh Courier is written by none other than Lem Graves Jr. Lemuel, this is the nephew of Bill Graves, and he goes as Gene, and he's a quite well-known journalist, and we'll come back to Gene in just a second. So the Orsil McGee house, which is the house that this court case was about, still stands. It's not in good shape, particularly, and the neighborhood's basically gone. I mean, as in vacant land, but clearly important. The case is certainly much ballyhooed in Michigan. Here's a book from UNC Press done about racially restrictive cases, and what's kind of interesting is none of us knew, to my knowledge, that Bill Graves grew up in Oberlin in this house. So quite the surprise when we come to realize that. And there's Bill Graves' entry into Who's Who of Colored America. And here's more about Bill Graves' nephew, Lemuel's son, Lem Graves, who grew up in the house that's across the street from where Harris Teeter is now. And he wrote for the Pittsburgh Courier, which was the largest African-American newspaper of its time, came out once a week on a Saturday. And Lemuel wrote quite a bit about the African American contribution to World War II, which is important in setting up, again, a lot of the court cases that ended up happening after that. He was even featured in a movie, the word's not coming to me, a movie trailer, news trailer, telling the story about the role of African Americans in both the European and the Pacific fronts. Here he is, that's Gene right there, with President Truman. He was one of this first time that Negro newspapermen have accompanied a president on a tour. Lem Graves, Washington correspondent for the Pittsburgh Courier. There's Lem and family as Lem's about to take off, or Gene is about to take off for Paris, where he works for the State Department. State Department clearly hired a photographer. There are some gorgeous photographs in the Federal Archives of Gene Graves and his work in Paris. That's his daughter, who we have gotten to know through this process, lives in Florida, known as Bunny, and she's a treat. And don't you know, this photograph riled a lot of white people in the 1950s. Here is a white woman, working for a black man. But he wrote quite a bit about how Paris was a good place to live and not face the racism that he faced here in the United States. One of the things that we found recently, because the daughter had saved a number of things, is correspondence between Gene Graves, Lem Graves Jr., and J. Edgar Hoover. And there's the response from J. Edgar Hoover, who is quite defensive about the question about whether there's racism in the FBI. And there's Gene Graves, who's who had colored America. So quite an amazing family. Now, Gene, some point, we don't know, there's not a date on this. This is something I really hope we can find a student to dig and dig and dig and dig into and see what we can figure out. He did several family trees, sometimes in writing, sometimes typed, to clearly he must have been talking to his father or his mother and writing this stuff down. But here's an interesting one. Billy Boylan, okay, Boylan Avenue, Boylan Heights, the Boylan House, owner of the Raleigh Minerva, is having a baby with the slave, purchases her, and this would be his great-great-great-grandmother would have been the daughter of William Boylan, one of Raleigh's most prominent citizens. And here's a little twist. The more we look at it, the more we figure this out. This B. Hinton, I think he wrote Lemuel and then scratched that out. This would have been 1 year or one generation earlier, at least. Zulu prince, Ashanti warrior. There's a note about his coming in through Mobile. There's a lot of interesting stuff just right here on this one page. Then you go over to his mother's side, Louise Martin Graves, comes down over here. So Louise Martin's grandfather is a white congressman. Her great-grandfather, Henry Jett, was born as a slave. He's the one who went to White First Baptist Church and asked for permission from the White Baptists to found what was then known as the Colored Baptist Church across Capitol Square so we have the two First Baptist churches that are across Capitol Square from each other, and Henry Jett was the person who engineered that and was I think, a preacher at the church. I'm not entirely sure of that. And then you come down here one more generation. Henry Jett's father was Colonel William Polk, who was either the brother of or son of President Polk. Again, a lot of stuff there to unpack that we'd love to have somebody do at some future point. A few more discoveries. We knew that there was something unusual about the balustrade at the house, and we couldn't figure, there were these various descriptions and we couldn't figure it out. It didn't show up in any of the photographs we were finding. And we're sitting there going, there's a photograph, and we're kind of going, those coats are laying right over what we're looking to try to find. So there we found it in another photograph of the two daughters, this little detail. I sort of figured that somebody had a leftover set of balusters like that, and Willis Graves said, I don't have enough of them to put all together, so I'm just going to spread them out around the house. And this, here's the side of the house. This is where we're talking about right there. That photograph is taken right there. And there's the detail that we were able to reestablish on the house, which is interesting and very unusual. A few more surprises. There's the Isabel Bowen Henderson house on Oberlin Road in the 200 block that Russ Stevenson lives in, and he's a descendant of the Bowens. Well, there's the house that's been moved back and turned 180 degrees. It was an Oberlin house. It was one of those things when the research was done by Russ on the Isabel Bowen Henderson side, it got to where it was sold out of bankruptcy. And I was able, it was one of those quirky things of it's got to be somewhere down Cindy Russ's house. I was doing some work on the Haywood side, which is kin to the Graves. Coming up the other way, it goes into bankruptcy. There's about a 6-year period difference between them, but what's different between them is the survey. Because the survey, the old survey was it goes to this tree and that rock and so forth. And then by the late 30s, it's coming out with meets and bound description. But down at the bottom, it says also known as Oberlin Knot number 2. Found this just charming in a sense. This is a loan made by a cotton broker to Lemuel Hinton, who is Eleanor Hinton's father. Got his name misspelled here as Lemon, has names misspelled there as Lemon. But so you have to do research on all sorts of different names to see what you can figure out. And it's a loan of $75, and it was for the last payment for the land to build that house. And what's the collateral? 2 oxen, 1 milk cow, named brindle cow named Barnhill, 1 wagon, and various farm instruments. And it was repaid so that he could buy completely the purchase. One of the fascinating things was Dr. Haywood, who's a cardiologist in Los Angeles, had wanted to see his grandfather's house and couldn't figure out. He had this vague recollection of his grandfather's house, and because the way the deeds worked, couldn't figure out what house was his grandfather's house. And it was one of these discoveries that's just really quirky. You know this, you know that, and you suddenly go, wait a minute. They're the same thing. And so here's Russ and Ellen with the Haywoods, who came out from California. He's well into his 90s, wanting to see his grandfather's house. And there are the windows in his grandfather's house, very similar to the windows that we have here. They would have been sisters. So not surprising in a sense that sisters would have had some similar aspirations. And Dr. Haywood's extremely well known in California. Coming back over to the Graves house, we found that during the paint research that the back part of our house here was the 1-story center hall, 1 room on each side of the hall house that the front was added onto. And we found all sorts of interesting construction things, like this is not exactly the most stable construction for a footing. Inside the house, we found any number of studs that did not quite make it all the way. Cases where they, for example, here, this is new, the lighter wood is new, but there's the old wood, and they just, because that one didn't make it all the way to the top, they just, nailed a new one on it. Sometimes it made it, sometimes it didn't make it. Show another example of that. Here's a case where that one doesn't make it, that one doesn't make it, that one doesn't make it, which is all to say we had all sorts of structural issues we had to deal with to get this house up to code. And again, I think they were building the house with what they could get their hands on with friends who were laborers. This one is an interesting, there's a porch post that's been cut down to become additional support for the tower on the front that's supported by the roof. One of our sad discoveries of sorts is that the oak crest was not painted with a water repellent paint, and so the first time any Windex was sprayed on it, it started disappearing. So we had to repaint part of, you can kind of see in the word oak. We had to repaint. The house was sold by the Graves. The house went into foreclosure and it got bought out. Ultimately, went through several ownerships before the Graves, the Fields family bought it in 1945. Mr. Fields was the worked 30 years for the New South River and ended up being a very close friend of Josephus Daniels in his late life. Very prominent in the neighborhood, Fields family, and very involved with the Baptist church, which was right next door. We haven't found out nearly as much about Reverend Hall and his family as we'd like to. We put it together that Reverend Hall's father and mother were from Warrenton, and Plummer's an important name in Warren County. Hall is an important name in Warren County, and her name was White. So it made sense to us that it had to come from there, and then we were able to confirm that. I hope at some point we get to do more research on the Halls. And then to wrap things up is a little silliness. I say that we're the animal shelter. We were working with the City of Raleigh Historic Development Commission to save Raleigh's last kind of intact Lustern house, one of those prefab steel houses built after the World War II. And on the property was a number of sculptures done by George Morris, who was a plasterer who in his retirement made all sorts of plaster playthings, so to speak. We moved this one, we've been jokingly calling him George, but his proper name is Snoopy. In case you're confused, George is 12 feet tall. I mean, this is our contractor who is several inches taller than me in front of him. And we have decided he's a great mascot for Preservation North Carolina. He's in the backyard here, and he represents the animal shelter that we love and work for. And with that, let's open it up for questions, comments, etc. Back to you, Clarissa.
I was trying to unmute here. Yeah, so I'm gonna open it up to questions. You all, like I said, can utilize the chat if there are questions that you have, and I can just read them off there, or you can just unmute yourself and ask, and I will try to moderate that. If we have too many folks at a time, then you can just, there's a reaction button down at the bottom. I think they only give you like a thumbs up and a clap, but we'll just pretend the clap is like raising your hand. But yeah, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and go for it.
So these houses, are they lived in today? Are they open for viewing? And where exactly are these two houses now?
Okay, these houses are actually the offices for Preservation North Carolina, which is a nonprofit group, and we have had any number of folks come through it. They are offices, but we after COVID we'll figure out how to get more get more folks into the house, but we regularly have folks show up at the front door wanting to see it. So if you're interested, let me know. Oberlin is about 1.75 miles, really about 2 miles west of downtown Raleigh. And what happened was Oberlin was created as a freestanding town. When Cameron Park got built and Hayes Barton got built, flanking Oberlin, the wealthier white folks didn't want this thing going on in between them, and that was the point in the early 1920s that Oberlin was annexed into the city of Raleigh. A whole lot of folks lost their houses because of city taxes. So,
thank you for bringing all of this to us. It was wonderful. You're wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been an interesting, great project. And I guess I should say that it's the project that we thought would take 1.5 years and took 3.5 years. That's a whole nother story.
I have a question, Myrick. I'm interested in knowing it because I think I caught that you had started looking at the Fields Graves house or Graves. I never have gotten the order straight, but you know where I'm talking about, the greenhouse. You started looking at it years ago before the most recent. So how many years between, and was it fallow then, or you were still cultivating and hoping?
Well, what happened in that show was in the late aughts, the 2000s, first decade of the 2000s, we got word that the family wanted to sell the house, and we had conversations with them, but their asking price was well in excess of $1 million. And as it ended up, we did make an offer on the property where the house was sitting. Mm-hmm. And our offer was not accepted. We're not sure what happened on that. Our offer was not accepted, and the offer of a developer who's done a lot of work in that area was accepted instead of our offer.
So this was just before 2000. Is that what I'm understanding?
We started about 2007, 2008. Okay. Was our first communication with the Fields family, and then the house was purchased in 2017 for demolition.
Yeah.
But the price had come down from about $1.25 million to $500,000 during that period. And when this house is sold for $500,000, that's pretty clearly it's being sold for the land, and that was what was going on.
How fortunate that the developer was willing to work with Preservation.
The developer was very willing to work with us and donated the money he would have had to spend on demolishing the house. He actually gave us the money for the move, which was very generous.
Right.
Myra, we've got a question in the chat. I'm going to ask that question from Elizabeth Bloom. Can you talk about the move into the houses, how to find a mover, how safe is it for the house, how far can you go? How much does it typically cost? And she mentioned an example that in Maryland, they moved a brick house called the Galloway in Talbot County, and that house was moved by a barge across the water to another location.
Moving houses in one sense is fairly easy. In the sense of from a technology standpoint, it's lifting up, get on wheels in one form or another. The challenge is the route. And that's where the cost of a move is highly, highly, highly dependent on the route that you have to move it. It's also very dependent on how easy it is to lift up, to get under the house. I mean, if the house is close to the ground. I mean, the move of the little Lustern house was as complicated as the move of these two Victorian houses, because the house had to be disconnected from a concrete base, concrete foundation. You can move a house as far as you want to if you had it, get through. You have to kind of go, okay, where are the bridges? Where are the overpasses? Where are the telephone lines? Where are the power lines? Where are street trees? Where are natural gas vents? All of that sort of stuff is what's the limiting part. That's way more limiting than the technology of actually moving it. We've been involved in a couple of houses that had to be moved. Well, one case was moved 40 some miles, and it had to be cut apart in small enough pieces that it could go down a road, and bridges had to be figured out. Sometimes the route for those kinds of moves go all over creation in order to avoid bridges or something like that, and then you put it back together on site. The houses, in one sense, that kind of move, you end up losing the plaster. This house, the Graves house, we lost the plaster, but we were going to have to lose the plaster anyway, I'm sorry to say. And that's because I showed you those various structural deficiencies in the house. There really was no way to repair the structure without taking the plaster off. The windows that I think are so gorgeous, the bay window, the three windows together, they're so absolutely gorgeous. There's a steel girder running across them now, above them, because there was not sufficient support for the porch roof and the second story above it, that we had to go in and put a steel plate across above the arch. So again, we lost the plaster, but we knew we were going to lose it. We have worked with any number of house moves that the plasters move just fine. And, you may have to do a little repair here and there, but we've moved plenty of houses with plaster intact and they've been fine. It's really amazing, the technology that they have. Wolf House Movers out of Pennsylvania did it. They bought out a North Carolina house mover, Blake House Movers out of Greensboro. And they did a great job for us. Moved both houses. And the two moves were totally different from a technology standpoint, just completely different from each other. Next. So I got that answer? Enough?
Let's see, there's a question from Carol Stahl. Following up on the loss of the plaster, did y'all restore with plaster?
What we did was we used a variation. It's a sheetrock method that is fully skim coated. So the look of it looks and behaves like plaster, rather than going in with putting in new lath and so forth. But what we did is a product that, by skim coating, 100% skim coating the sheetrock, you have the feel of the plaster, and you also have the durability of the plaster.
Got you. And then we have a question from Lucy Kagan about, so in the Graysfield house, what are the rooms like upstairs? Are they literally like the first floor rooms?
Their upstairs rooms are two bedrooms, and they're both smallish rooms with a fireplace and windows on two sides of the and a center hall. So it's a center hall with a room on each side of the hallway. They are not more than 12 inches or 12 feet deep, which is, again, the house looks big because it's sitting on the front of the height is sitting on the front. So it's just two pretty simple bedrooms upstairs.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Nothing else in the chat so far. If you guys have questions out there, feel free to unmute.
I'll go back to questions about, for instance, you've got two rooms downstairs, and behind there is a kitchen. Is there a dining room? How does it sort of set up?
So
Originally,
with the Gray's house, you had two rooms up. Downstairs, you had 4 rooms with a center hall. The 2 rooms up front are the 1880s house. The 2 rooms behind that are the probably 1870s or late 1860s house. So you have, and this is one of the challenges we had for moving the house. I'll come back to that in a second. So you've got 4 rooms, 2 on each side of the hallway. There was historically a kitchen at the back. The kitchen at the back had some really serious damage to it. When some utility work was done, it caused it to rack pretty badly. So we ended up taking off a kitchen and porch and putting back on an addition fairly similar in size to what we took off. So we've in a sense got the 1880s version, the 1870-ish version, and then the 2019 version going on. The whole house, basically everything, we kept everything that was old and we took off everything that was new. I am somebody who doesn't like to send a scrap to the landfill if I'll have to, but we had really severe termite damage with that house. It was clear that it had not been kept treated, and this is something worrisome in terms of it was occupied for a number of years by an older woman, family member of the Halls, and obviously it was not on her radar screen to get termite treatment done. And with new wood, it's just pudding for the termites. They just loved it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Other questions, thoughts?
Yeah, well, we're, just after about 20 minutes after 5. So we'll, I guess, Myrick, if you're cool, like officially end our presentation. If you all folks that want to hang out for a few minutes afterwards, we will do that and close down our screen so we can see everybody. But thank you all for coming, and please check back with us on our website for our next event, which will be on the 29th of September. I don't have it put up on the Shelter Series page yet, but it will be up this week, and we look forward to seeing you there. Please take the survey afterwards. Well, thank you all for coming.